This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 486, GraphQL and Drupal Decoupled. On today's show, we are talking about GraphQL, Drupal Decoupled, and what to do with them with our guest, Jesus Manuel Olivas. We'll also cover Cores UI as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Jesus. He's the CEO and co-founder at Octahedroid, an open source enthusiast and advocate with over a decade of experience contributing to the Drupal ecosystem. He's the creator of Drupal Console and a contributor of several Drupal modules, such as build hooks, GraphQL Compose, Decoupled Preview iframe, and Visual Editor, among others. He's currently working on the Drupal Decoupled project to allow Drupal to work as an API-first CMS to make modern front-end implementations seamless. Jesus, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you all for the invitation.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are Scott Weston, Senior Director of the Drupal practice at Bounteous.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here again.
And as usual, John Picozzi, Solution Architect at EPAM.
Hello, Internet friends.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's bring in Martin Anderson, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to control your site's cross-origin resource sharing, aka CORS configuration, directly within the Drupal admin UI? There's a module for that. It's called CORS UI, and it was created in September of 2016 by Sam Becker, aka Sam152, a prolific module maintainer in his own right, though the most recent release is by Matt Glaman, who has been on the show and will need no introduction for many of our listeners. It has a 8.x-1.2 version available, which supports Drupal 9, 10, and 11. It is actively maintained and has security coverage. And there are 2 open issues, one of which is a bug and also has a patch available. All of which is pretty good considering the module is in use officially by 274 sites according to Drupal.org. Now, by default, Drupal will block default cross-origins requests. And since 8.2, you can add a section to your site's services.yaml file to enable responses and specify what headers, methods, and origins should be supported. This module provides a form within Drupal to control these values. This could be helpful if, for example, these values need to change on a frequent basis or for less technical users who are experimenting with a headless architecture. I should note that the bug mentioned earlier throws a fatal error in PHP 8, but is a simple fix. So if you want to try out this module, make sure you apply that patch. So let's talk about CORS UI.
Cores are one of those bugs that you occasionally get, and I always feel like I just don't quite understand well enough what is going on. I mean, it's usually not super difficult to fix. Sometimes it's a matter of making sure that something is served over HTTPS rather than HTTP, but having a way to kind of handle some of these types of issues in the UI, I think will be something a lot of my clients will be, interested in. So I'm definitely going to be taking a look at this.
Is it fair to say that they're bugs, right? So like it's more of a security feature, not a bug, right? As far as like when these things pop up.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, where's that line, right? Is it about if something's broke, if something's not working, does it matter that it's like CSP, right? If your CSP is incorrectly configured, things will break. Well, it's not really a bug because you've defined the rule set that allows things, but it's a bug in the sense that the site's not working. So yeah, I mean, in the technical sense, it's probably not a bug. It's a feature of the system, but you still need to fix it.
So where I've seen CORS issues in the past, like typically you add like, domain, right? And then a list of like allowed, looking at the module, I see that you have allowed headers, allowed methods, Okay, so I guess allowed origins is where you would you'd put your URL or URI in order to allow those to access. Is that fair to say, Martin?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to me,
Hmm.
probably one of the benefits of using a module like this is that it makes it easier to troubleshoot, as opposed to doing what a lot of developers are probably tempted to do when they run into some of these issues and just sort of wildcard to accept anything, which may not be, from a security standpoint, the best way to go.
So, Martin, my question here, I think, is, or at least a follow up, is permissions. Have you dove into the permission set for this? Because I imagine, like, I've worked on sites where CORS policies have been kind of a pain, and this feels like it's a good solution to getting around that. However, you wouldn't want to give this power to everybody, I don't think.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, the ability to make these kinds of changes, as you suggest, has potentially pretty far-reaching implications. So it could be very easy to use those settings to either open things up too widely, or conversely to make a simple change that could break one or more sort of client front end sites. So definitely want to be judicious about who has the ability to make these changes, but yeah, CORS changes or CORS configuration changes, I guess I should say, are definitely the kinds of things that you want to know what you're doing before you go in and start making those.
So
Yeah,
just to clarify, the permission setting on this is pretty good from a Drupal permissions standpoint.
Let me go ahead and check.
Sorry. I'm
Yeah,
asking the hard hitting questions.
I haven't
That's right.
worked a lot with cores directly, but isn't the various settings for cores, isn't that saved in the services YAML file? And then, what happens if there's a conflict between something that's in that YAML file and a configuration for the CORS UI? Does the CORS UI update services YAML? Or am I just like totally off?
I would be very surprised if it updates the services YAML, and I would
Yeah.
also be very surprised if the service YAML doesn't take precedence.
Yeah.
We'd have to look at the code, test it out though. But yeah, I would be just the way it generally works.
Mm-hmm.
So the module does implement a config subscriber. I'm not 100% sure, how that informs the issue we just talked about, but just as sort of a data point there. It wouldn't surprise me, as you say, Nick, if the YAML file, if configured, would take precedence, but definitely something that would be worth checking out. And to answer your question from earlier, John, there is a separate permission for administering cores, and it does flag that as one that is, security, has security implications, so that'll show up in the permissions interface as well.
Good to know. All right. As usual, I don't know how you do it, Martin, but week after week, you always find an on-topic module of the week for us to talk about. So if our listeners had a suggestion for a future module of the week or just wanted to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
We are always happy to talk about candidates for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Awesome. Thank you. See you next week.
See you then.
Whenever we have kind of one of these talks about a different technology, let's start with a high-level overview. Can you tell our listeners what GraphQL is?
Well, simple answer, it's a query language that allow you to query or fetch data from your APIs. In a way, it's and it's not the standard in Drupal, because Drupal, it's for some I decided to use an API, whatever. But yeah, it's a query standard. It's in a spec and give you a lot of like features, like you can put a talk in upcoming questions.
So is it something where you're feeding all of your API data into GraphQL and then you have the ability to query against it?
Well, you can build your GraphQL as you want it. Either in the particular case of Drupal, there is a module that allows you to expose your API, your data as GraphQL, right? Basically, give you an endpoint that you can query. But you can do a lot of things with that. You can build your own. There are something called resolvers, which is basically functions that respond to your queries, and within that function, you can do whatever. Either call your REST API, your JSON API, just pull a file from their system. You can expose anything you want to. And at some point, it's used a lot for something called federating, which is basically getting different APIs put into a single endpoint, and you can use a standard and single GraphQL, API for querying like multiple data sources or APIs that you have, either legacy APIs or your own custom APIs.
I see. So it's less about like GraphQL, like pulling in all of this data. It's more of a, I don't know, you could call it like a normalization layer between whatever, whoever's interacting with GraphQL and your APIs. You can set multiple data points for GraphQL to kind of look at, and it's going to basically normalize it out for you.
Yeah, it's mostly used as a gateway for pulling data from different, either like single source or multiple sources.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And then for a resolver, you mentioned, federating information. So is that an example of that would be, give me, I have a page built with layout builder and paragraphs. Give me everything that needs to display on this page in one call to GraphQL. So you're not calling, APIs over and over and over again to get the data directly. Is that?
Yeah, think about this. You can have, your GraphQL working as a gateway. Basically, within the configuration of your GraphQL, you call Drupal, and you also call Airtable, or you call, spreadsheet or any other API. And then from your front-end implementation, you only have like one single call to the backend. And then that particular function that I mentioned earlier, the resolver thing, is going to take care of, to the pulling data either from Drupal and from other places. And also that particular function can take care of like merging data or massaging the data and giving you in a way that you need it in your front end if you want to.
Okay. And that's awesome. I'm wondering, so you just mentioned that there's a Drupal module, but can you get into a little bit more detail as to how you might use GraphQL with Drupal?
Sure. Well, it's as mentioned, Drupal out of the box expose data through JSON API, which is basically another spec, another standard. And there is a module, the GraphQL module, right? And just talking a little, about version 3 and version 4, because there's some differences there. With version 3, when you install the module, then you have like automatically generated the queries that you can access, and you can access mostly anything on the system, like nodes, taxonomies, and whatever. And that module was pretty simple to install and configure, just like Composer, and enable the module, and that's it. And it works like out of the box, and expose the data in a way which probably wasn't like GraphQL spec compliant, but it works, and it was fine. Then probably like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years back, we have version 4, which basically has this nice feature of Drupal that congratulations, you have like nothing or almost nothing. You install the module and nothing get exposed. But the module itself, in its core, it was like more advanced and give you like more capabilities to extend it by writing code. But as we all know, Drupal, it's known by ecosystem and modules that allow you to like install things and using, click and point to configure. And that wasn't the case for that particular module. So that's when I decided to work in a GraphQL Compose module, which basically allowed you to take advantage of GraphQL 4 and provide you with an interface that you can use for clicking, pointing thing. I want this content type, I want this fields, I want to rename this field in a certain way, and also expose several things, like any like content, paragraph, content types, taxonomies, media, and users, and whatever you want to. But you have full control of what you want to expose through the graphical interface. But it also gives you capabilities for extending it by writing code. So there are some APIs and hooks that you can attach to extend and do whatever you want to do with your with your own, like create your own resolvers, your own like definitions of the GraphQL, adding fields, whatever.
So the GraphQL module for Drupal, does that only allow you to interact with Drupal, or do you have the ability to set other endpoints that might be outside of your Drupal installation as other resources?
Since you have full control of any resolver that you want to do, you can add a new resolver on your GraphQL, schema, and then within that resolver, you have code access, so you can fetch an external API or do anything you want to, like loading a file, like TXT file or whatever, or might be from there calling an agent and do some some like open API call, whatever you want to do.
And then it provides obviously it doesn't read out of the database. It would have to read out of the Drupal JSON API to integrate with Drupal, right?
The module itself?
Yes, the module itself.
No, the module goes through the the database layer of Drupal. It doesn't need GraphQL JSON API for like Drupal access.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
you can
a
think
separate
about
it's a
as
separate technology.
yeah, you think about this as a different, set of like tools. So again, you don't need JSON API. I mean, you can still have JSON API if you want to, but the module itself, it doesn't need it.
Okay, makes sense.
So you mentioned that we didn't need necessarily JSON API. What are some use cases, I guess, of using GraphQL on a Drupal site, if not for headless or building an app or exposing an API endpoint? Like, can you use GraphQL just internally in a traditional Drupal site?
Well, yes, you can, but for like an internal monolithic site, you don't really need an API itself. It's basically, you have the pre-process, which has access to the data, the team layer, whatever. And at that point, probably you don't even need neither, like JSON API or GraphQL. But yeah, it's mostly used for treating your Drupal side as an API CMS first, and then build, a like mostly like foreign monitoring tool or any other like client, like CLI or any external,
So
should.
So like to double down on Scott's question, right? Like you could, in theory, you could basically build a coupled Drupal site, but if you needed an API to basically integrate or talk to other systems, then you could bring GraphQL in to kind of sit next to it and help out with that.
Yeah, definitely. You can still build your like Drupal as a monolith and then expose the API GraphQL as an API. And then your front-end implementation can use that, as a connection point for accessing data and, and interact with the system.
So do you ever use it just as that, purely that type of use case where like Drupal is just one of many and there's a larger GraphQL pool that's pulling in a bunch of stuff that's being used? Would you install the GraphQL module just so that the centralized GraphQL instance can communicate with Drupal and pull its
Yeah.
information in, or to federate it, or or would it just integrate directly with Drupal itself somehow?
Well, for those even as always, it depends, right? If the implementation, fortunately, Drupal has a lot of ways to connect data from different sources, and then you can expose them through GraphQL, and then make Drupal the API gateway. But at some point, when things are getting a little more complicated, maybe that's not the right way to do. What we tend to do is have an external GraphQL API gateway, which use Drupal for Drupal GraphQL to accessing and connecting to Drupal and different other sets of like GraphQL APIs, or maybe connect directly to a database and then build this API for that particular database, and instead of like using Drupal as the main gateway, we tend to do a different gateway, mostly like a Node gateway or a Rust gateway that we deploy, to a different platform, and then use Drupal for serving your Drupal content, and then this gateway for pulling data from the other different sources, and then you can build your front end. And at that point, your front end can still consume Drupal from that gateway, because that gateway is giving you access to the Drupal API and the rest of the other APIs.
What are some of the technology requirements for GraphQL though? Is it different than kind of the standard Drupal settings? Like, do I need to install software on the server, like something special, or is it just everything? It's automatically available.
Not at all. It just enable the module, the GraphQL module, and if you don't want to write on the resolvers, install the GraphQL Compose module, and doing a little configuration on it, and you're all set.
One of the things I've never like, I know there's a lot of services out there for hosting GraphQL yourself, and this is why I was thinking of this because I think we had a show a couple months back, or a couple of years ago, where we talked about what was the name of that service? Viking? No,
I think you're talking about Valhalla.
Valhalla. Yeah.
Whoa, the
Pantheon.
Gatsby days. Well,
Yeah.
the Gatsby Valhalla or the Pantheon Valhalla?
No, the Gatsby one.
Yeah. So and that was built on top of GraphQL, right? So I guess the reason why we're asking about the technology is like where is the information living in GraphQL? Like if you install the GraphQL module in Drupal, is it just creating additional entries into the database? Is it literally just a map? Like it's not storing anything and it's just an interface? Like how is that piece working? I guess that was my question.
It's think about it as a gateway. It's just like an entry point that allows you to connect to your data source. In this particular case, Drupal, and provide you access to that Drupal. Again, the benefit is full type, so you can ask for certain things, and only those things are query, and maybe you can ask for like related entities or
Okay.
nested entities, and on a single request, it happens in the backend, whatever. But the data is stored in Drupal. Even in those like gateway systems, most of the data is always stored on the original data sources. I mean,
Get it.
for the particular case of Valhalla, or now it's called Gatsby, Netlify Connect or something, whatever it's called nowadays. That's a different story, right? So what they do is they pull
Got it.
data from the different sources and they store, but that's not a um this is not how GraphQL spec work. This is more like their implementation of that particular product. It's so they pull
Okay.
data from different sources and they use it as a catching layer. Think about so basically the Valhalla thing was more like the Gatsby data source thing, where they
Got it.
pull data from different sources and keep a copy of those, and then having particular process for connecting and keep pulling and having the data and saying whatever. It was way more it's way more advanced and complex in place of kind of weird complex implementation of GraphQL. But again, it's more like product decision done in that particular implementation than a
Got it.
GraphQL spec.
Got it. That makes total sense. Thank you.
So I'm going to add on to Nick's original question, with the like somebody getting set up and like technology that you need, right? So we kind of covered that, but I'm just curious, like if somebody's just getting started with GraphQL, like what do you suggest for like a first step? Like where do they go to learn? What do they like? How do they get familiar with what they can do? I imagine maybe GraphQL has pretty good documentation, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, there's a couple of good books of GraphQL. The Apollo site has a great documentation. There is, the official GraphQL site. I could probably get the link and share with you for the next note on the site. But there's a lot of resources related to GraphQL. But a good thing about GraphQL, it's once you enable the module, then you have a playground. So within your Drupal site, you have this particular, page that is called GraphQL, which is a playground that you can start loading that page and start typing your query, like query by, you can query like articles and listing what's in the system, adding like queries, filtering by IDs or whatever. So out of the box, by installing the module, you have a chance to play with the API. And since GraphQL is full type, so think about this particular playground is like fully typed and autocomplete. So you're like typing thing, like node article something, and that it's autocomplete the query itself. Then if you want to start pulling fields, you type like T and then title appears, and then like pad, and it shows up for you. So it helps you a lot to understand the system because it has this introspection capabilities of the definitions on the schema.
That's
It's,
pretty
it's
helpful.
so interesting because I see it as like, I'm always telling people that Drupal is a great, a great connector, a great, glue for multiple systems, and this feels like a great way to, kind of like add on to that and kind of normalize out the API interface for bringing together Drupal with a bunch of different other maybe external systems. So, that's very interesting to me. As we talk about Drupal, right? The module ecosystem with Drupal is quite advanced. I'm wondering if you could share some of your favorite GraphQL specific modules that are in the Drupal ecosystem.
Well, I'm a little biased for that. Or definitely GraphQL Compose, right? But then, besides that, there's a couple of other modules. Like there's GraphQL Preview. So that module allows you to preview like nodes on, basically on previous state on Drupal. Because we don't want to talk about previous state because, temporary storage and all those things happening, like not on the, saving as non-standard like database way as the node data, but that module allows you to do that. So basically by enabling the module, you will be able to query a particular node and telling them, I want to see this node as a preview. So basically give you that version of the module that you are currently working on, while on the Drupal system, right? So it's similar as the preview page on page on Drupal. There is this other module called GraphQL Compose Web Form that allow you to expose web form information. So you can enable web form module as usual, write all the handlers and that you want to, also, to handle submission, to, fetching, pulling data to like MailChimp, whatever. And then use this module, this GraphQL Compose Web Form module to expose web form data that you can use in your front end, but it also exposing something called a mutation, which is a way to push data back to Drupal. So you can pull the form definition, this field has this form with this particular type, whatever. Then on your front end, you can build the form on React and then, have a way to post the data that user enter on the form. And then you use this mutation to push back the data. And then from that point, web form handles whatever you want to handle, like again, connecting with a CRM system, with MailChimp, whatever, the same way you always do. But that's another great, implementation of the integration with this particular module.
That's pretty awesome in the fact that like you could have a mobile app that is and have it still use the same functions that your web form on your website's using, right? And push and pull the data that way. That's pretty awesome. I like that.
There is another couple. The one it's called fragments, GraphQL Compose fragments. Basically, give you all the fragment definitions on your system. So that module doesn't probably you see that doesn't help a lot, but it helps you when you're starting with the system. It helps you understand which fragments are in the system. A fragment, it's kind of a definition of what you have. So you have like a node. It gives you all of the fields that on that particular node, built in a way of called fragments. Basically, fragments are like little snippet of code that you can reuse on your GraphQL queries. There's another great implementation of the custom field module. Yeah.
So sorry. So for fragments are like if you have like a common pattern is to have a field components on a list, and that's just a list of paragraphs, right? And so if you are commonly querying field components and you want to just be able to iterate through and grab everything,
yeah,
you could create a fragment for that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you have this particular like calling a user or a menu link or like a link or whatever. So you can have this fragment link and use in multiple paragraphs. And then, as you mentioned, you can have this fragments as a reference for like multiple component and calling like in multiple pages or multiple like content types.
Okay.
I have a question not related to Drupal modules, but in the past when working with APIs, I've used Swagger to kind of like document APIs. And I'm wondering, is Swagger needed if you're using GraphQL, or does GraphQL do a pretty good job of like self-documenting?
That's You don't need it because GraphQL is do a great job self-documenting. It's again, since I have access to the site definition, it's like self-documented, provide you introspection so you can ask. I mean, as what I was mentioning earlier on the playground, because I was typing things and things get auto-completed and you can have access. So you can see what's on the definition. Definitely, there are some tools that you can use for generating a static version of that documentation with GraphQL, which is, I mean, it's not hard. Basically, you run a process, either, a CLI process or maybe GitHub action on every deploy that you can get that definition as a static site, with either Astro or, whatever static site, tool of your preference. And you can have this particular documentation for the API. But again, you don't really need it because it's self-descriptive. Yeah. Just finally right into the GraphQL module, integration. There is an integration with the custom field module. I don't know if you're aware of that particular module. That module that saved you a lot of headaches while working with nested references and paragraphs kind of thing. And that's, we tend to use a lot of the module, and I'm glad Andy has integration with the module, so it can save you a lot of headaches while working with paragraphs and nested, references.
And how specifically do you use that module then?
So when we build components on the front end side, we use paragraphs in order to provide structured content only for the first level. The other nested levels, instead of adding paragraphs inside paragraphs in another paragraph, what we tend to do is use whenever we need like a fieldable field or like more an advanced, object type instead of a single field, like map key. We tend to use this module to build this, think about like have a testimonial and then have an author, whatever, and I need like name or something. So we use custom field to build this like fieldable field and use that on that particular testimonial paragraph. So the testimonials have, the testimonial, the whatever, but any like nested object or more advanced complex object, we use this instead of another nested paragraphs and save us a lot of headaches for, database storing. And
what advantage does that give in this case?
The way it stores the data, it's, there's some, I don't want to say issues with paragraphs. We'll start adding a little extra complication on the database. It's a great module for doing data structure, but there's some complications when you start, saving and a lot of things, and the way we tend to work with decoupled, that we were talking in the future, we save, from the front end, multiple saves on the paragraph, and then in the node, the databases start getting, big, and you don't want the database to explode. But at some point, we start into replacing those nested elements with custom field, which behaves better in the database way of things. You might want to invite Andy, and he can give you a better explanation of the module, how the module works.
Yeah, the root. My understanding is the root is that the custom fields are fieldable, but they're not entities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't end up with thousands and thousands of revisions that you can end up with. So yeah, I actually
in tables, because fields are tables, and that's the beauty of Drupal.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that I hadn't considered it from that point of view. So that's actually, yeah, I have some thoughts now. So I'll have to investigate a little bit more.
When you mentioned the new version of the GraphQL module 4 came out, you said it did not have a lot of the auto generate functionality, but there's GraphQL Compose to help with that. What other improvements have happened between those modules, and is there an upgrade path? What if someone still needs the auto generate stuff?
Unfortunately, there is no upgrade path from 3 to 4 within the GraphQL, its module itself. And at some point you can probably mimic the original, queries or definitions, but maybe that will be a lot of work at some point. So, and we have a couple of sites still with GraphQL 3 and still trying to figure out what would be the best approach for that. But unfortunately, GraphQL 4 doesn't provide you with the upgrade path because they basically deprecate any automatic generation. It's like, version 4, it will be better. It's more like a building blocks for you to build on top of. but there's nothing. And that's problematic, definitely. But at some point, maybe you can probably have like a little small migration. I have done in the past, having like a different, like a multi-dev Pantheon or whatever, and start working on those definitions, start mimicking things, or maybe, so in other places what we have done is having this gateway in top of Drupal where you can mimic 3, make it look like version 4, but it's still having version 3 on your Drupal side, then install version 4, and then just replace, it's pointing to the latest, version, make everything works, and then we swap those versions. Again, there's some workaround, but like official way to doing this, unfortunately, there is not.
So is there like a scenario where like version 3 becomes like end of life or like gets phased out? Like I would imagine if you're building something new, you're going to go with version 4 because it's the latest and greatest. But like, what do people do if they're on 3 now and they like, is there a chance it could go away at some point?
Well, I mean, at some point, it's hard to maintain a module, maintain like 2 like fully different version of a module. It's harder. So it will happen when I have no idea, and you are in version 4. Definitely, you need to like think about of a migration path. What I think it's with a lot of like I would say with a lot of AI capabilities nowadays, you can probably get your all your data just given to a LLM, figure out what you need to change, and having a process that can help swapping and replacing things here and there. So definitely it will be bumps because nothing is free, but there's always workarounds.
Shifting gears slightly, can you tell us a little bit about what Drupal Decoupled is?
Well, Drupal Decoupled is a project that allows you to use Drupal as a API CMS first. It's still, I mean, that's like the basic thing, but in the back end, it's a Drupal recipe, which basically your recipes are great that allow you to install Drupal, pre-configure with all that you need for building like decoupled implementations. It's an opinionated way of how we build decoupled sites. And long story short, what you can have, it's a full Drupal site pre-configured with GraphQL Compose, and some other goodies. But it also provides you with a couple of front-end implementations. So we call them starters. So we have a Next.js starter. So we have a Remix starter that now will be renamed to React Router 7 starter because they basically remix REST. 3 will be like, React Router, whatever. So give you both, give you the backend, give you the front end, fully, configure. If you go to the site at Drupal Decoupled site, you will be able to spin up a site on Tugboat, the project from the Lullabot people, and you will be able to see the site, running both. So you will have like Drupal side, you have your front end side, you will see how that works for you. So we build it that way so people can try easily. So they don't have to like load anything in their system. They don't need to like have like DDEP or Lambda on their system. Just click things, click one click, then wait like a minute or something, and then your site is there, back end and front end. But again, it's think about it as an opinionated way we have for building sites. We provide you the full back end, the full front end, and after that point, it's up to you. You can do anything that you want to.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I'll have to check that out. So one of the, I guess a quick follow-up question. I think you already answered this, but I kind of thought at the beginning of the show that there was a mistake in the title because the title is Drupal Decoupled, right? And everybody always says decoupled Drupal. Is there a reason for the inversion of that name? Is it different than decoupled Drupal? Or it's just because it's a specific project in an opinionated way, right? Nothing deeper than that.
No, nothing. It's basically a Drupal. What you have, it's a Drupal recipe, which basically end up in a Drupal site. That's it. It's that project born with different collaboration we had with, working with, get the Gatsby, with Next.js, with like multiple decoupled implementation, like, since the Jamstack days, or, get Gatsby Next, whatever. And then we find out like we really, within our theme, we rather prefer GraphQL because it's easier for us to onboard like front-end people
Mm-hmm.
because they already know GraphQL. They don't know JSON API and they don't know the Drupalisms of Drupal, like all this
Yeah.
nested relation, thing that happens in Drupal. And the beauty of GraphQL, it's in the GraphQL Compose module, we kind of clean up a little that Drupalisms on the definition. So we basically remove the field, underscore something. So we provide you with a more like a friendlier, way API. So front-end people have a better and easier, transition to working with Drupal. So again, we decided to, let's build a version of this decouple thing. That basically we have the Drupal Next or Next Drupal something, and there's some other projects that there's some others. So we decided to build this in a way that will make easier for us to work with our projects. And at some point, when we have something that we can easily share, so we created this project.
Sorry, I was going to ask, how long has this project been going on? When did you first develop it?
So I think we released last year by DrupalCon something, but in the end, it's a way. So the project itself, it's has been passed for like several iterations, as I mentioned earlier, since the Gatsby days, and then all the Gatsby work we did, then Next.js implementation, some remix work we did, we use this for building decoupled sites, like applications, full like React dashboards, whatever. So we take all those ideas, put it into a single place. Fortunately, at that point, recipes were almost ready, by previous DrupalCon. So we decided to build in that way.
Okay.
At some point, we revamped it in that way because it wasn't built on recipes. So we kind of, do all the recipes work, make it easier for people. Basically, it's single line command that you install. If you want to run in your computer, just get the project, just run ddet install, and you're all set. Everything gets configured in your system as well. So it's, again, we tend to work, do a lot of heavy work for our teams for them to start easily. And then we decided to take that and use and share on the as an open source project.
I think it's interesting to kind of like the idea of like, again, I'm going to use the term normalizing because I think it's a good term for what is happening here, right? Because a lot of what you see when you get into a decoupled project is I need a React developer, right? But I need that React developer to kind of understand Drupal's APIs and how the data is going to be presented and the structure of those APIs. And this is a normalization layer that allows for you to use relevant technologies using GraphQL, right? And Drupal, right? So like using those technologies and just kind of like normalizing that API to say, hey, React developer, you don't have to know anything about Drupal. Like you can still build your components and interact with this how you normally would, and you won't have to dig around to try to find certain pieces of data that you might need to build those components. So that to me is very interesting and very powerful. Like I think that's a great step to kind of getting off the island, or at least bringing people to the island and getting them to understand that we're trying to make things easier for them.
We have seen that a lot in the past. Like getting sometimes we get a decoupled site someone else built, and it's it's full of Drupalisms. Even the front end, even the React components are built into like Drupal way, which is basically not what you wanted to do. If you want to have an update path for your implementation, right? We have seen like something like someone query JSON API and just query the data and just pass the full data object to the component, which is basically, and then within the component, you have to deal with relations, and then if there is there on it, if there is not, and there's a lot of logic involved. Another benefit of using, Drupal Decoupled project. So we provide you with the GraphQL API configuration. So again, the site has already a couple of paragraphs and fields and all that small configuration. And it also provides you with the front end, whatever. But the components are built in a way that talk about UI, like heading, like whatever, whatever you want to name it. You still need this glue, place, or this place where you glue things together, kind of like pre-process thing. Sometimes you name things in a different way on the data structure versus the UI component. So we provide you with something called component resolver. So if you go to the starter, you will see there's something called component resolvers, which is basically a way for us to pull data from Drupal. As we were mentioned earlier, way to pull data for the components and paragraphs, and within this particular space, this component resolver, we have a way to understand which component it is, and then we extract data from it, and then we turn into like UI language. Might be you, for a reason, you call something in your Drupal, like items, but now it's in your component, you call it like cards, a set of elements. And might be your content type has, or your paragraph has this items, field, but in your UI, you name it cards, right? So we have this space where you can you can massage the data, you can, transform the data and give it to the UI component. In that particular naming convention. Think about another example that I can realize. You have media image, right? Or an image, which is media. Then media has a name, like a media image, which is kind of, it's for people that is not related to Drupal. You are giving me an image object that contains, or an image object, right? That contains a media image object that then contains certain key values. So what we tend to do is in this component resolver, we kind of flat the data a little. So have an extra layer of like normalization. So GraphQL gives us the first step of normalization. Then we have this. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can pass, data as it is. But we tend to do that again for make it easier for UI people, for front-end developers to talk their own language. So you don't have to. They don't have to worry about understanding Drupalisms and how Drupal works and how Drupal, like handle things. Again, Drupal is great for data structure on a data structure, way. But the UI structure, it's a different story.
Yeah, I think the media example is an interesting one because I know with my own projects, I've had is instances where we've had to basically build an API endpoint that allowed for, hey, here's the image, and then here are all the derivatives of this image that you could possibly use in your front end breakpoints, right? So it's like, being able to kind of like where, if you're coupled, Drupal kind of just does that on its own. It's all built in, right? So it's interesting to kind of hear that, you're kind of thinking in that way. Staying on the theme of decoupled and Drupal, right? I'm wondering what you think the best decoupled use cases are for Drupal. Is it a case where you're like, oh, I would use Drupal for every decoupled use case? Or do you think like it really works better for some cases?
The answer, as usual, is it depends. We don't even use Drupal for every single site. The same way we take decision, this is really a Drupal site. And if not, we tell, our client, this is not a Drupal site. This is a contentful site. This is something less complicated. This is easier if you go this route instead. Maybe this is a static site. And sometimes, updating static site is harder, but you don't want to deal with all the Drupal, complications and management if you don't need it. The same way for decouple, when it's sometimes it's hard. Sometimes client came, and they want a front end side because they already have a team of front end developers. We have this client, this enterprise client. We help them migrate their site from Drupal to Gatsby Drupal implementation. But then later on, they acquire another startup company. And now they have a lot of people that know React, they know Next.js, and they live in Argentina. It's easier, it's cheaper for them to build them that way. So they are like, these were more like a was like a fully decoupled site. Homepage was decoupled. Certain like the blogging was decoupled. Certain sections of the site were decoupled. Mostly in a more like a static way. Gatsby, how Gatsby works, and they were thinking about using like more advanced Gatsby, like server-side rendering, whatever. But then they acquired this other company, so now they have a full set of React Next.js developments. At that point, it's for them it's no brainer. Let's build this into Next.js. We still keep using Drupal because they've been working with Drupal for like 12, 15 years. They have a lot of content, and at that point it makes sense. And then for when you really want to have a modern experience on your site, which is you can still make it happen with Drupal, but the theme system in Drupal, the way I know things are changing in Drupal, single directory component and Tailwind and whatever, but it's kind of there's a gap on that. It's coming in Drupal, it's happening on Drupal, but it's already happened on other platforms like front end implementation like React or Vue, whatever. And again, maybe if you already have a theme that knows like React, then it's easier for you to do that. And it also makes sense because every and every single update Drupal update it give you a lot of give you some pain because it's hard to keep updating Drupal by using Drupal as an API. You only need to worry about like core and certain modules. You don't have to worry about like theming. You don't have to worry about like preprocessing or hooks or whatever that gets deprecated or maybe changed at some point. Or now the way of handling theming in Drupal is single directory component instead of the old way of doing it. And it's again, you need to revamp your site. So revamping your site in Drupal, it's harder in a way like you need to revamp your backend and your frontend. By going decouple, it's probably is way easier to change your front end because your API keep kind of the same. It's basically you only use Drupal for providing you with the data. And I know this is a lot of people say, maybe you want to change at some point from React to Vue, but that nothing happens. Doing that migration on the front end, it's complicated. But again, it's easier to keep upgrading your site if you're using like front end tooling. And then the ecosystem on the front end side of things is just huge. It's among us. There's a lot of like libraries and components, and you don't have to deal with jQuery and all those things in Drupal. So again, your front end team is just like really happier if you go that way. Again, it's easier as an agency owner. It's easier for us to hire people that are really good doing front end and they know React, and they don't have to worry about all the Drupalisms that we've been dealing with for all the years. Again, there's nothing wrong with Drupal. It's just the build the way it is. It's changing a lot. Yeah, it is, unfortunately. But again, at this very moment, it's easier for at least for us and for the kind of clients we have to build sites this way.
So that brings a question to mind for me: is decoupled Drupal your default when you do a Drupal site? Or
when we do a decoupled Drupal site, sometimes we do decouple contentful, decouple whatever. But yeah, the way we're building Drupal decouple, it's in a way we can swap the backend. So at some point, it's gonna happen. I don't know if any of you are going to Florida, the DrupalCamp Florida. I'll be there talking about this project and also talking with friend of mine from Yacala. And the way they are using the front end, their decoupled implementation, it's a way they are doing some contentful work, but in a really, really similar way we're using Drupal decouple. And we have done that in the past. So the way we build the project can allow us to basically swap the backend, use the same, just make some slightly changes on the this. Remember when I was talking about this component resolver implementation? So we still have that layer, so we can change things make little things here and there, and then keep taking advantage of the front end. So we can use multiple or different CMSs with different APIs. But the front end implementation will be pretty much the same.
Oh, so you can use it. So it helps both ways, right? Like you said, if you're trying to upgrade from Gatsby or change from Gatsby to Vue.js, you can kind of interface with GraphQL. But also, if you're upgrading from Drupal 10 to Drupal 11 in a way that requires you to rebuild from scratch, you can just be like, hey, for this information, go to this endpoint. For that information, like GraphQL, because it has a resolver side, can help with that on the Vue.js side or whatever your front
Or
end is.
maybe, or maybe you don't want to deal with upgrading with Drupal and you want to move to Contentful. That's it. You can still take some advantage of this. I mean, that's a reality that is happening in a lot in with our clients.
We're gonna have to change the name of the podcast to talking Contentful. But I mean,
it's a reality. I mean, it happened. We need to find a way. And I mean, again, as an agency owner, we need to find a way for our clients to be happy and pay us, and or developers to be like, I mean, productive and and reuse their knowledge. So going this way, it help us both.
It's very clear, like from your answer to the previous question, like you're letting the client guide the decision, and then you're advising them like, oh, if you need a bunch of complexity and you need to build a bunch of custom stuff, Drupal's probably a better way to go, because Contentful might not support that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it is kind of client driven, and you're in a atmosphere where you're there to serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's because the the type of client that we manage. So sometimes like they came with sites for like 10, 12, 15 years of content. They have gazillions of nodes and a lot of information, but they have a lot of like microsites. And sometimes they want to reuse the same Drupal. Let's spin up a new Drupal site from this site. You don't need that. You don't need that monster for this like event page or for this conference page. So at that point, is why don't we just like use something else? But they can still use a similar implementation on the front end side of things with with React and this component resolver. And then they swap at that point is the API. So they're calling whatever. And I've been telling Contentful because what they used. But again, you mentioned something really important, John. It's when you really want to customize, like heavily customize a site. It's hard to do with something else than Drupal. I mean, I tried all of them, like all of them.
I mean,
and I haven't found that way of customizing. I would say easily, because Drupal is not easy, but
but it does end up being cheaper, I think, in a lot of cases, because some of those other platforms may not be capable, but also if they are capable, it's very expensive to be able to develop and implement that sort of scenario, depending on what it is.
Yeah, and they are not capable because most of those platforms are products or platforms that you consume directly as an API, with exceptions of like Sanity and those that you can customize somehow by writing code. There's some plugins and things you can write and add to some of those platforms, but again, they are not that extendable as Drupal.
So talking about using Drupal as your backend, performance comes to mind. And if you have a pretty dynamic site, you're going to be hitting GraphQL endpoints or APIs a lot. Does the GraphQL module have like caching mechanisms built into it, or is that something you have to think about on your own and devise a plan for caching?
It does has a caching mechanism built in top of, but again, but it also, you can also add some extra layer of caching at page level if you want to, or if you go next. Yes, there's some like way too many different ways of caching. Like I don't remember all the acronyms they are having now for providing you with caching. But there it is. The module has some caching mechanisms, and in most cases, we catch pages on Cloudflare or whatever, and then we have modules on Drupal. Whenever change, we detect which route changes, then we ping an endpoint. That endpoint purge those caching. So the CDN level, you still have to do some caching thing. That's for sure if you want to have a better performance. And again, you can use the GraphQL caching mechanisms, but if you have like way too much traffic, you can still have another layer of caching by caching your API by query, your queries, and you can caching queries, and you can detect which parameters you're passing and caching those. You can detect which UID is being called, and whenever something happened on the back end, this node change or this paragraph change, you have that UUID, and you can push those IDs only. So you can have this extra layer of complexity, but again, it will depend on how heavy your traffic is. So giving you an answer, yes, it is, but there's some ways to make that, more aggressive caching.
How about roles and permissions? And I have kind of two questions about this, because one is one of the really strong things about Drupal is that it has a very powerful roles and permission system, and and recently with the access policy stuff, it's even more powerful. And that's something that doesn't always map to other systems, or a lot of other systems are kind of hand built. How do those permissions map to something like GraphQL?
We got you covered. Because whenever you do a GraphQL query, you act as a user. Well, you can openly, you can have your API open, which basically you don't have to, and you don't want it to do. But other than that, you can enable the simple out module, and generate this. I don't know, how they call things. I don't remember top of my head how they call the consumer. You can create a
Okay.
consumer, and then with that consumer, it gave you like client ID, client secret, you can have on your front implementation. And whenever you want to call Drupal, you behave as a user, right? So you're behaving as a certain user with a certain role. And at that point, you can have Drupal take full control of what that user have access to. So if that user doesn't have access to a particular entity or field or whatever, that data ain't going to come back from the Drupal side, from the Drupal API to the front end side. So again, it's already the benefit of this kind of thing. It's you can really take full advantage of Drupal. So a big misconception I can get hearing on decouple implementation is, oh, you miss a lot of Drupal, feature. There's lacking things in Drupal. You can still take full advantage of those of Drupal, almost full advantage of Drupal, because you still can, again, the way that the systems are built,
Okay.
So as we come to a close here, I think the last question on my mind is around kind of decoupled Drupal, or decoupled in general, right? Is like, do you think the advancement of AI has made decoupled more appealing to folks?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think yes, because and not only that, think about this. You have a Drupal site, which is behaving as an API. Then you have your front end implementation. And this is like, something new we're working on the, the Drupal Decoupled project. So we're working on a way that you can, post data back to Drupal through the front end, right? So think about this. You load your front end page. It's still embedded on this iframe within Drupal, node, view page, whatever, but you have your components, so you can click around them. At this very moment, the current implementation, you click things, and then the Drupal sidebar happens, and you and edit the node inside Drupal, right? That's how the current implementation is. But the next version we're working on, it's you load the front end, still on an iframe, still loading the page, basically, and there's a configuration that allow you to be in edit, node, whatever. And from that page, you can click components, and then there's a React app that allowed you to push data back to Drupal. So you can change things by clicking on the components. Think about that layout paragraph thing. I don't know if you have aware of that module. Think about that, but fully on the React side of things. But the beauty of that, since GraphQL gave you fully type definition of the components of the structure, you can easily implement an AI, project that is aware of those things, and generate a page for this. And what is going to happen, and you can tell, to that particular generation, generate a page, with this particular topic, but make sure you return the data in this using this schema. You can provide JSON object, and that schema can mimic your your paragraph definition and then you can get that the definition, just add push those components to your front end, then you're happy to, and then just click save, and then that data will be back to Drupal. But at this very particular moment, everything is still happening outside of Drupal, right? It's still happening on the front end layer. But the beauty of that, it's regardless of, because Drupal AI, it's moving really, really fast. There's a lot of module happening. Again, there is a lot of the ecosystem on the Node.js side of things for AI. It's just huge. The SDK from Vercel, it's incredible. The way they move is again so fast. They adding a lot of features, connectors, and all that. So the way we're building the AI implementation for Drupal Decoupled, it's more on the Node.js side of things. And again, this is something that it's coming. Probably, I don't know if we have something for DrupalCon, but we'll see.
Okay.
But yes, giving an answer, yes, it is, because you have a lot of access to all the metadata and definitions, and you can play around with that and do whatever you want to.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for that question was really like, for me, it seemed like having a decoupled site where a lot of your data, as you just said, your metadata is available via API was, well, I feel like if it's easy enough to pipe it to a front end, it's easy enough to pipe it to an LLM or have an LLM, read that data and use it to power some sort of AI. So I think that's interesting as well.
And since the answer could be an structured object, you don't have to do anything or nothing other than just get the data and just give it to your front end, and then your component will be filled with data. Everything is gonna be automatic preview there, and that's that. There's some challenges like media and consuming data from Drupal, like filling list of data like nested related elements and web forms. There's challenges, obviously, but yeah, there's a nice future coming.
There's challenges, but it's been around for long enough that there's solutions to a lot of them and documentation. But yeah, there's always challenge. And to be fair, media is a challenge even in native Drupal. I mean, the amount of templates you need to create when you have a media implement, or the number of display modes you need to create for media, yeah, that's a problem anywhere.
And we're used to customize a lot of Drupal, even like forms, like entry forms, when sometimes we don't really need to. I mean, if you think about it, yeah, I mean, it's always good to be able to provide users with better interfaces. But sometimes I think we just like spend a lot of time there and, on adding those capabilities on Drupal. And sometimes user only need like a list of things, like previews of things, and they can click around, and that's about it.
Makes sense. All right, Jesus, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure learning more about GraphQL and Drupal Decoupled.
Thank you for the invitation and for spending some time talking about some of my passions and about Drupal and Decouple. And a funny thing, it sounds like, we've been doing a lot of things. I've been trying to, doing Drupal and some other things, and always coming back to Drupal. It's like since like Drupal 7, then I moved to Symfony, and now Drupal 8 and Drupal console, and then moved to Jamstack, and now Drupal Decoupled. So it's always, and the beauty of that, I have an overview of what's happening outside of Drupal, and I'm and I can bring some of that knowledge into Drupal and into our projects and client work, which keep things interesting.
Yeah, that's super valuable for the community too. Okay. Do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Blue Sky with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar.
All right, Jesus, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, had any questions, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, yeah, you can. I'm a JMOLIVAS in like most places, like Drupal.org, Twitter, and GitHub, and all the other places where we nerds hang out. And I mean, the company side, there's octahedra.com. And yeah, but basically, I'm JMOLIVAS as well on Slack. So yeah, happy to answer any questions you have. Any questions related to just talk about like Decouple or Drupal in general, React, whatever. Just ping me on any of those places and happy to talk with you.
Awesome. Scott, how about you?
People can get a hold of me on Drupal Slack. My handle is Scott Weston.
And how about you, John?
You can find me at Picozzi.com or at John Picozzi on all the major social networks and Drupal.org. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
All right, see you guys next week.
Have a good one.
Yeah.
Good one.